It started out like any other shift for Jimmy at McDonald's number 219. He had been working there for a few months now, mostly covering the late-night shift. Jimmy was just a regular guy in his early 20s, trying to save up some cash for college. The pay was all right, but it was the stories about the restaurant that got him spooked. They said the place was haunted, but Jimmy always brushed it off as small-town rumors. One Friday night, things took a turn. The drive-thru had slowed down around 11 p.m., and Jimmy was mopping up the floor when he heard something strange, soft footsteps echoing down the empty hallway leading to the restrooms. He thought it might be one of the other employees, but when he peeked around the corner, there was no one there. Shrugging it off, he went back to cleaning, but the noises continued, whispers, like someone was talking but just out of earshot. Jimmy's skin started to crawl, but he didn't want to show he was scared. It wasn't long before he heard a loud crash from the kitchen, followed by the unmistakable sound of the deep fryer sputtering on its own. He ran back to the kitchen, finding nothing out of place except the fryer, which was now empty. Jimmy shook his head, trying to calm himself down. "Must have just been a glitch," he muttered. But the weirdness didn't stop there. Later that night, as Jimmy was wiping down the tables, he heard the soft chiming of a music box. It was a haunting tune, playing slowly, out of time with the usual hustle and bustle of the restaurant. Jimmy looked around, trying to find the source of the sound. His heart skipped a beat when he spotted a shadow moving across the wall near the play area. He took a deep breath and walked toward the play area, the music getting louder with every step. The lights flickered, and he saw something, or someone, dart behind one of the tables. Jimmy's heart raced as he called out, "Hey, who's there?" No answer. As he reached the play area, he found a dusty old music box on the ground. It must have been left behind by some kid years ago, he thought. But before he could pick it up, he heard the soft giggle of a child echoing through the empty restaurant. Jimmy whipped around, trying to pinpoint the sound, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He took a step back, his breath catching in his throat. His instincts told him to get out of there, but his curiosity got the better of him. He walked back to the front counter, trying to shake off the fear that gripped him. But then, he saw something he couldn't explain, an order on the screen, but no one was there to place it. The order read, "Happy Meal with a Toy." Jimmy's hands shook as he cleared the screen, thinking it must be a glitch. But when he looked up, there it was again, but this time, with a chilling addition, with a side of fear. His skin prickled, and he knew he needed to get out of there. As he turned to grab his things, the lights went out, plunging the restaurant into darkness. Panic set in as he fumbled for his phone, using its flashlight to navigate his way out. But as he reached the door, he heard a voice behind him. It was faint, like a distant echo, but unmistakable. "Don't leave me," it said. Jimmy froze, slowly turning around to see a figure standing near the counter. It was a woman, her face pale and ghostly, with hollow eyes that seemed to look right through him. Jimmy tried to run, but his feet wouldn't move. The woman took a step toward him, her voice low and sorrowful. "Please, don't go. I'm lost. I just want to go home." Jimmy's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the apparition slowly fade away. The lights flickered back on, and the haunting music box lay silent on the counter. Without another thought, Jimmy bolted for the door and didn't look back. He didn't tell anyone about what he saw, fearing they'd think he was crazy. But from that night on, Jimmy refused to take the late shift, and McDonald's number 219 remained a place he never wanted to see again. Jimmy learned the next day that the restaurant had a dark history. A young woman named Evelyn, who used to work there, had disappeared under mysterious circumstances years ago. Her body was never found, but some folks said she never left the place she once called home. Jimmy couldn't shake the feeling that he'd seen Evelyn's ghost that night. He hoped she'd find her way home eventually, but he wasn't going to stick around to find out. It was the graveyard shift at McDonald's, and Tom was running on empty. He had been working the late-night shift for months, trying to make ends meet while studying for his college degree. It wasn't the ideal job, but it paid the bills, and he thought he had seen it all: drunk customers, teenagers causing trouble, and the occasional oddball. Little did he know that this shift would be anything but normal. The restaurant was dead quiet when the clock struck midnight, except for the hum of the fryers and the soft music playing over the speakers. Tom was in the back, cleaning the grill, when he heard a loud thud from the storage room. His heart skipped a beat, but he tried to brush it off as something falling off a shelf. He made his way to the back, flashlight in hand, and pushed open the door. The storage room was dark and dusty, but there was nothing out of place. Tom sighed with relief and went back to the front, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that crept up on him. He had almost made it back to the grill when he heard the sound of something dragging across the floor. Tom froze, listening intently. The dragging sound was getting closer, and it was coming from the storage room. He gripped his flashlight tighter and walked back to the room, his pulse quickening. The door creaked open, and this time he saw it, a shadowy figure moving in the corner of the room. Tom's breath caught in his throat as the figure turned toward him. It was a man, or at least it seemed to be. The figure was gaunt and pale, his eyes empty and hollow. Tom tried to move, but he was frozen in place, unable to tear his eyes away from the apparition. The figure took a step toward him, and Tom could see that it was dragging something behind it, a large, heavy chain. The man's voice was raspy, like nails on a chalkboard. "It's not safe here," he whispered. Tom's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. He managed to find his voice. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure's expression was one of pain and anger. "You shouldn't be here. None of you should." With that, the man vanished into thin air, leaving Tom trembling and alone in the storage room. Tom stumbled back to the front of the restaurant, his hands shaking. He needed to get out of there, but he knew he couldn't just leave the restaurant unattended. He decided to check the security footage, hoping to find some explanation for what he had just seen. As he scrolled through the footage, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The figure he had encountered in the storage room was present on the video, moving through the restaurant, dragging the chain behind him. But there was something even more disturbing. Tom saw himself on the screen, but he wasn't acting like himself. He was pacing back and forth, talking to the apparition as if they were old friends. Tom's heart raced as he realized he had no memory of the conversation. What was going on? He rewound the footage and watched the scene again, trying to make sense of it all. Then, he noticed something else. The figure seemed to be pointing toward a specific spot in the storage room. Tom took a deep breath and decided to check it out. He couldn't ignore the feeling that there was something he needed to see. When he returned to the storage room, he went straight to the spot where the figure had pointed in the footage. He moved aside some boxes and found a trapdoor in the floor. His heart pounded as he opened the trapdoor, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Tom hesitated for a moment, but his curiosity got the better of him. He took a flashlight and made his way down the stairs, the air growing colder as he descended. At the bottom, he found a small room with a metal door at the far end. The door was locked, but he managed to break the rusty lock and push it open. Inside, he found a chilling sight, a makeshift dungeon, complete with chains and shackles. It was clear that something horrific had taken place down there. Tom's stomach turned as he imagined the suffering that must have occurred in that room. As he looked around, he found an old newspaper clipping on the floor. It detailed the disappearance of a young man who had been an employee at McDonald's decades ago. The article mentioned rumors of abuse and torture, but no one had been charged with any crime. Tom realized that the figure he had seen was the spirit of the missing employee, trying to warn him of the dark history of the restaurant. He felt a mix of fear and sadness, knowing that the spirit had been trapped there for so long. Tom knew he had to leave and call the authorities. He made his way back upstairs, his mind racing. He locked the storage room door behind him and grabbed his things, determined to never return to that place again. As he walked out of McDonald's, he couldn't shake the feeling that the spirit would never find peace until the truth was brought to light. Tom knew he had to do something about it, but for now, all he wanted was to get as far away from the restaurant as possible. The haunting of McDonald's number 219 had left a mark on him that he would never forget. It was a quiet Tuesday night at the McDonald's on Main Street. Sarah, a college student working the night shift, was behind the counter, counting down the minutes until she could close up and go home. The restaurant was empty, except for the soft hum of the fryers and the buzz of the overhead lights. Sarah had just finished wiping down the tables when the front door creaked open. A man walked in, his face hidden under a hood. He moved slowly, his head down, as if he were lost in thought. Sarah put on her best customer service smile, even though the sight of him gave her a strange, uneasy feeling. "Welcome to McDonald's," she said cheerfully. "What can I get for you?" The man didn't respond. He just walked up to the counter and stared at the menu board. His silence made Sarah's skin prickle. She tried again. "Are you ready to order?" The man finally looked up, his eyes cold and piercing. "I'll take a coffee, black," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Sarah nodded and turned to make the coffee, her hands trembling slightly. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this customer. He seemed out of place, like he didn't belong there. She handed him the coffee and he took it without a word, then walked over to a corner table and sat down. Sarah tried to focus on her tasks, but she couldn't help watching the man out of the corner of her eye. He didn't touch his coffee, just sat there, staring into space. The minutes ticked by, and Sarah began to feel more and more uneasy. It was almost closing time, and the man showed no sign of leaving. Finally, Sarah mustered up the courage to approach him. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're closing soon. Would you like me to pack up your coffee to go?" The man looked up at her, his gaze intense. "No," he said simply. "I'm staying." Sarah's heart raced. She didn't know what to do. The man was giving her a bad feeling, but she didn't want to upset him. "All right," she said, trying to sound calm. "Just letting you know." She went back to the counter, pretending to clean, but her mind was racing. What if the man had no intention of leaving? What if he was planning something sinister? She wished she wasn't working alone tonight. Just as she was about to call her manager for help, the man suddenly stood up and walked over to the counter. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. He set the coffee cup down in front of her, and she saw that it was full, untouched. "I changed my mind," he said. "I don't want the coffee." Sarah nodded, trying to hide her fear. "No problem. Can I get you anything else?" The man leaned in close, his breath cold against her skin. "I want you to tell me a secret," he whispered. Sarah's blood ran cold. "What kind of secret?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man smiled, revealing sharp, yellowed teeth. "The kind you keep locked away in your heart," he said. "The kind you don't tell anyone." Sarah backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. I don't have any secrets like that," she stammered. The man chuckled darkly. "Oh, but you do," he said. "We all do. And tonight, I want yours." Sarah didn't know how to respond. She could feel the man's gaze boring into her, as if he could see right through her. She tried to think of a way to get him to leave, but her mind was a blur. Before she could say anything else, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, ornate key. "This key unlocks your heart," he said, holding it out to her. "Take it, and show me your secret." Sarah recoiled, her fear turning to terror. "No, I don't want it," she said, backing away. The man's expression turned dark. "Take the key," he said, his voice menacing. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for the key, but just as she was about to take it, the lights flickered and went out. She gasped, her heart racing in the darkness. When the lights came back on, the man was gone. Sarah stood there, trembling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The restaurant was empty, and the front door was still locked. She ran to the door, unlocked it, and stepped outside, looking around for any sign of the man. But he was nowhere to be seen. Sarah knew she had to get out of there, so she locked up the restaurant and left as quickly as she could. As she drove home, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just encountered something supernatural. She couldn't explain the man's disappearance or the key he had tried to give her. But one thing was clear, she would never forget the night of the last customer at McDonald's. It was one of those nights when the sky was dark and the wind howled through the trees outside the McDonald's on Lincoln Avenue. Jake had been working the late shift at the restaurant for a few weeks now, trying to save up some money for college. The shift was usually quiet, except for the occasional drive-through order or teenager hanging out in the parking lot. Jake finished mopping the floors and walked back behind the counter, relieved that closing time was almost here. The neon lights of the playland area flickered off and on, like they often did. Jake shook his head. Those lights had been giving them trouble for weeks now, and he needed to put in a maintenance request. As he finished his rounds, Jake heard a strange noise coming from the playland area. He paused, listening intently. It sounded like a child's laughter, but there were no customers in the restaurant at this hour. He shook off the uneasy feeling and walked towards the playland area to check it out. The playland was empty, just as Jake expected. The colorful slides and climbing structures stood silent, casting eerie shadows in the dim light. He walked around, looking for the source of the laughter, but found nothing. As he turned to leave, he heard a loud thud from inside the play structure. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He stepped closer to the play structure, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. He called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" But there was no response. Jake's mind raced as he considered the possibility of someone hiding in the playland. He grabbed his flashlight from behind the counter and made his way back to the play structure. As he climbed inside, the laughter started again, echoing through the tubes and slides. The sound sent chills down his spine, but he pressed on, shining his flashlight around each corner. The laughter grew louder, and Jake's pulse quickened. He could hear footsteps now, as if someone, or something, was running through the play structure. Suddenly, a small figure darted past him, disappearing around a bend. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, a child, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, running through the playland. He chased after the figure, trying to catch up. The child vanished into a crawl tunnel, and Jake followed, his heart pounding in his chest. When he reached the end of the tunnel, he found himself in a small room with no sign of the child. But there was something else, an old, tattered doll lying on the ground. Jake picked up the doll, its glass eyes staring back at him. He felt a strange, heavy sensation in the air, like he was being watched. The laughter started up again, this time louder and more chilling. Suddenly, Jake heard a soft voice whispering in his ear. "Help me." He turned around, but there was no one there. He felt a cold breath on the back of his neck and spun back around, only to find the child standing in front of him. The child's face was pale, and their eyes were hollow. "Help me," the child repeated, their voice echoing through the playland. Jake's fear turned to sadness as he realized he was speaking to a ghost. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice shaking. The child reached out and pointed to the doll. "She took my doll. She took my soul." Jake understood now, the child was trapped, unable to move on because of the doll. He had to free the child's soul. He nodded to the ghostly figure and turned back towards the exit. As he climbed out of the play structure, the laughter followed him, growing louder and more desperate. Jake made his way outside and took the doll with him. He walked to the edge of the parking lot, where a small wooded area began. Jake dug a small hole in the ground and placed the doll inside. He whispered a prayer for the child, hoping it would help release their soul from the curse. He covered the doll with dirt and stood back, waiting for a sign. The laughter slowly faded away, replaced by a soft, peaceful silence. Jake knew the child was finally free. Feeling a sense of relief, Jake returned to the restaurant and locked up. As he walked away, he glanced back at the playland, now dark and quiet. He hoped the child had found peace at last. Jake knew he'd never forget that night, the night he helped a ghost find its way home. But he also knew one thing for certain: he would never work the late shift at McDonald's again. If you enjoyed these stories, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future videos. Don't forget to like and comment below. Thank you very much for spreading love. See you in the future video.